Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you're coming from. My name is Carrie Freed from the Office of Inclusive Excellence.
And my name is Dr. Alyssa Alonso with the Student Counseling Center.
And today we are so excited to bring you our fourth and final podcast recap from the Women's Empowerment Bootcamp that we have been holding throughout the month of March. So far, our sessions have been really great, really insightful, really fruitful, and I feel like our participants really got a good understanding of themselves and of their community as people conditioned womanhood. And I'm really excited about this last session that we have going on. But before we move on to talking about radical self-love, Dr. Alonso, do you want to remind us of what we worked on last week?
I'd be happy to, Carrie. So the challenge from last week was around emotion regulation strategies. If listeners will recall, there were 4 different strategies that we asked you and our group members to select from to think about finding ways to bring yourself into an even state of mind when you're in a conflict or trying to make decisions to resolve that conflict. So the challenge was to practice and use at least one of these emotion regulation strategies and really using those emotions as a gauge for where you are, and then choosing to make decisions based on something that you value rather than from the intense emotions in the moment. So really wanting to help use those emotion regulation strategies to focus in a place where you can act out of that value. And that can really be an act of self-love.
Absolutely. And we thought, what a perfect time to talk about self-love. You know, Women's History Month just wrapped, and there's so many opportunities for us to celebrate women and celebrate who we are. As those of us who are conditioned in womanhood know, sometimes we fail to give ourselves the love that we're pouring out and into other people, and even especially those from underrepresented communities, right? The women in underrepresented communities tend to pour out so much into other people. And very often do we forget to pour back into ourselves and create space to pour into ourselves and to make decisions that pour into ourselves. So, the question for our group at this time was what does it mean to love yourself? We really wanted to look into what does self love look like beyond the bath bombs and the face masks and the getting your nails done. While all of those things are definitely acts of self love, what else kinds of things are we looking to engage in that make us know that we're giving ourselves the time and attention that we really need? So some of the things that we talked about was, doing anything for yourself, whatever those things that you need, making sure that you're prioritizing those things and creating a life and creating friendships that kind of center around making sure that you can still get the stuff that you need, right? Not just centering yourself in relationships where you're constantly helping others or where people are always coming to you for help and support, but you're not receiving any of that on the other end. But making sure that you're the one that's also receiving, and asking for support and help from your friendships.
Yeah, another critical piece that we talked about with what it means to love yourself is being able to give yourself grace. Like all human beings, we make mistakes or we maybe act in ways that aren't aligned with our values, and that can end up leading to us failing a whole bunch of different type of ways. And so part of what our group talked about was talking about part of loving yourself is giving yourself grace in those moments and treating yourself with as much kindness and compassion as you can.
Absolutely, which can be really tricky, right? It's like, especially like I mentioned, marginalized and underrepresented communities, we often have to live up to other people's standards, right? We often have to fit into a mold that was decided by someone else, and that not really, or more often than not, wasn't really curated to fit the things that we have to offer the world, right? So perfectionism and
Mm.
trying to make sure that we're fitting into other people's boxes can be really hard. And it can also be something that induces a lot of shame in yourself when you're not meeting other people's standards, right? When you're not even meeting your own standards. So giving yourself grace in the moments where you are perceiving that you're failing or where you're perceiving that things aren't going the way they're supposed to go, is a huge way to let that self-love in and just know that you're a work in progress, right? And that's also a part of taking care of yourself physically, emotionally, spiritually, giving yourself grace and giving yourself time to tend to your physical needs, time to attend to your emotional and spiritual needs, right? Time is a valuable thing to a human, right? It's probably the most valuable thing to a human. So how are you spending your time, and how are you giving yourself enough time to pour that self-love in? Um, but of course, like I mentioned, time is a valuable thing. And one of the many things that makes loving yourself pretty difficult is creating the time to do so. But
Mm-hmm.
our team and our participants also mentioned that self care can be really scary, right? It can be very scary to look at the things that you need to do, or the relationships maybe that need to change or go away, or that need distance created between them, right? It's really scary to know this is something that I need to do for myself. And it's going to be very hard and it's going to be very uncomfortable, but it's very necessary.
Mm-hmm.
So, going through that process and going through those uncomfortable feelings and those uncomfortable stages before that growth spurt happens, right? That's scary. And I think a lot of people in their self care journey get stuck. They think self care is going to be, buying myself flowers every week and making sure that I get a sweet treat before I go to bed, or getting my coffee in the morning. And yeah, those things are very comfortable. And they probably do give you a little bit of, extra happiness for that one day, but they're not always things that are going to allow us room to grow. And we know that growth, it can be scary and very uncomfortable, right? That's the reason why they call it growing pains, because it does take that weird cocoon type change for big changes to happen, for us to have big breakthroughs in terms of our healing journey. So that's something our team talked about, was how scary self-care can be when it doesn't always feel good to show love to yourself, right? To choose yourself over others, especially when you're used to choosing others over yourself. And just to change into that mode of, I'm going to put myself first today, is really uncomfortable and can be really hard.
Well, a lot of this can tap into the condition of womanhood and it being considered selfish or can feel selfish to take time out of your schedule to look after yourself and take care of yourself. So, one of those barriers about making self-love difficult can be not only like being in this condition of womanhood of feeling selfish when we do that, but also just like you said, Carrie, time's a valuable resource. It's hard to make time to do those sorts of things for ourselves. So one thing I talk about with lots of folks is this idea called optimizing. And what optimizing is it's how to use the things that are already built into your schedule to make them more optimal for you in taking care of yourself. Like you mentioned, if you get a cup of coffee in the morning and that's like a little thing that you do to take care of yourself, like how do we optimize that time and make it even more beneficial? We take it from you getting a cup of coffee to you having that 5-10 minutes to really ground yourself in that moment, to be with yourself and think, okay, what does the cup feel like in my hands and what is like on my mind and on my heart for today, and like really opening yourself up to that. And that's the same amounts of time you would have had either way, but just optimizing that.
Yeah, and that intentionality piece, right? So moving and choosing things that are intentional and are intentionally made for you, right? Spaces and times that are intentionally carved out for you and your personal time is a huge thing that I think a lot of people conditioned in womanhood think, I have to do everything and I have to be everything for everybody, right? I have to wear all the hats. I have to make sure that I'm taking care of everyone. And I think a lot of this is bringing up like oldest daughter type feelings, right? If you're the
Mm-hmm.
oldest daughter, like you might feel like, well, I have to kind of just make sure that everything doesn't fall through the cracks. Everything everybody else can't pick up, I need to come in and I need to pick it up, right? And that could be really challenging. And I think, our historical and family values can really confuse us as to how we do spend our time and what self-love looks like for us. And the question that we raised to the participants, one of our sessions that we did a couple weeks ago talked about values and understanding your personal values and how they align with the actions and decisions that you make on a daily basis, right? So when you are stuck in that feeling of, well, like, my family's always told me that this is how I need to move, right? Like I need to be the last one to eat because all the men in the house need to eat first, or whatever the case may be. If that's something that you are questioning, or if that's something that's not something that you feel is a true value for you, right? That's kind of what self love looks like. Self love looks like, okay, what are the things that I have been taught that don't always feel true for me? And how can I rearrange these things or their priority in my life to make them feel where they fit more true, right? Where I do feel like I'm being authentic to myself and I am allowing myself to put myself first. Um, and then I feel good about that, and that I'm able to fully love myself according to my new personal values, and not just those values that have been instilled in us right through that conditioning of womanhood and our cultural values as well. As women of color, like I mentioned, a lot of our values are taken from our mothers and our grandmothers and our aunties and our TTs and all of those things. And while those women in our lives have definitely been, could be role models for the better or for the worse, right? They're not the say all, the be all. And especially here in America, we do have voice and choice and options in terms of what it is that we do and how we spend our time for the most part. So it's definitely something worth doing, is really looking and seeing how is my cultural identity, my family identity, my role in family, how has that influenced the way that I practice self love for myself? What are ways that I feel like maybe I might have to break some sort of chain or some sort of generational curse, right? I talk a lot to my cousins about generational curse breaking and what that looks like to be the first in your family to break out of a cycle of people pleasing, to break out of a cycle of fixing others. It's challenging. And like I said, that self love is going to be really uncomfortable at first. But once you're making decisions that are rooted in what you believe is true and authentic to you and valuable to you, like I said, now you're moving out of self love. And I think it creates a lot of clarity as to how to move forward and even some bravery as well.
Yeah, and I think that really speaks to the radical portion of self-love that we were talking about, in that it doesn't necessarily just look like the things you do for yourself every day, but changing some of those big patterns. Like, what would it look like for somebody to go from being somebody who considers themselves a people pleaser to being somebody who was more assertive and putting her own needs first? And that's that radical piece, because something like that can change your day-to-day life and a lot of your relationships and how you think about yourself.
Absolutely. And I think too, we're moving into a society that is a bit more radical in terms of the
Mm,
way that we approach most things, right? Look at the way we've decided to approach work and the ways that we've decided to approach, the different avenues of our life in the year 2023. 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, the world did not look the way it does now. And there weren't options like there are options now in terms of how you utilize your time. And there are more options in terms of letting people be their authentic self. And I've mentioned before in a couple other podcasts that Gen Z is a generation that I'm really excited to see in leadership positions, because I see work even taking up mental health days and creating more space for people to be flexible in their job and how they get their work done. And so many of us who are conditioned womanhood kind of get roped into obligations to our work and things like that. And it comes, I'm speaking out of personal experience, right? It's coming as a problem of barriers, right? And boundaries, like my self-love and the time that I have taken up. If I really like going to the gym but I'm consistently staying at work until an hour before the gym closes, then I'm not really giving myself the love that I deserve, and I'm letting other things take up space. But I do think that we can look forward to a world in which more room is made for loving the self and loving others. I'm excited about that. um, but when we talk about this problem with loving yourself being difficult, right? Um, Something that we talked about, and something that I think is something a lot of us struggle with, that we don't maybe not even know that it fits under this big umbrella though, of shame.
mm.
Dr. Alonso, tell us from your psychoeducation point, um, how does shame play into this self-love conflict? What's its role?
Definitely. So shame is an emotion, a self-conscious emotion. So we talk a lot about how different emotions have different functions. So, one thing that often gets conflated is the link between guilt and shame. The thing about guilt is that the function of guilt, when it is functional, because it not always is, when it's functional, it's to give you energy to right a wrong and hold yourself accountable. So it's about apologizing, it's about making a dedication to make changes for the future. That's like the function of guilt. So that icky feeling you get when you feel guilty about something, that's the purpose of it. You move forward to get rid of that icky feeling that you get when you feel guilty. The flip side with shame gets targeted at yourself, where guilt focuses on a behavior, something that you need to change in order to do better. Shame is about, I am a bad person. I have done something bad. And that's focused in on the self. So that weighted down feeling, that doesn't go anywhere. It's not giving you energy to do anything. So it often gets pulled into thinking about self love because when you're thinking about putting yourself first, there a lot of shame can come up and be feeling embarrassed or feeling not good enough or not worth that self love that we need to give ourselves. So having to sit with that shame is such a can be such a painful thing, and what we know about shame is that it can get more painful when you don't talk about it and when you try to keep it a secret and hide it to yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that there are, when we talked about this with our participants, I think a lot of us were thinking of the things that have been we've been holding ourselves back with, right?
Mm.
And sometimes it is that shame of being like, well, I think one big thing that not enough of us hear is that love, and even love from ourselves and love from others, is never something that you need to earn,
Mm.
right? Um, and shame often makes us feel like love is something we need to earn and that we need to gain out of action from others, right? Out of acceptance from others, out of being seen and deemed worthy as from others, right? And others' point of view. But um, love is kind of like the standard. Love is like the baseline, right? We all are very deserving, and it's not something that we need to gain more of or something like that, and especially from ourselves should it be the baseline. And oftentimes I think people that are conditioned in womanhood are thinking that love is not something that, or that we can be the most critical versions of ourselves, right? That we can be the people that give ourselves the most critique and that are the hardest on ourselves. But I think the opposite should be true, and that somebody who radically self loves is somebody that decides to love even with boundaries, and even outside of values, and even outside of conflict and inside of conflict, right? I can do everything out of love, even setting a boundary, even reevaluating my values and my priorities, right? Our values, that's what I'm talking about when I say that rooted in self-love, rooted in the things that are the most important to me. And when I know the things that are most important to me, I'm guided by self-love, right? I'm now choosing a path in my life which is most fulfilling and fills my cup up the most. So that's out of self-love. And when we're moving through conflict and we're taking time to relax and breathe and regulate our emotions, we're taking time to love ourselves and to even love the other person we're in conflict with, right? When we're in the heat of the moment or when we're feeling those ice cold feelings, it's very easy for us to shame others and shame ourselves. And so when you flip the switch and decide, okay, in this moment I'm feeling a lot, so I'm going to love myself enough to walk away. In this moment I'm feeling a lot, and I know this other person is feeling a lot, so instead of things getting worse, I'm going to love us enough to maybe create a pause, right? And so, really, our challenge for our participants was that changing and moving into radical self-love can be very scary. We already know that, right? You're on a growth journey. So you got to be prepared for it to be a little uncomfortable and to stretch a little bit. So self-love and radical self-love looks like moving beyond this shame feeling, smashing that shame altogether and letting love just fill in and not letting any other excuse other than I'm doing this out of love come into context, right? Out of love for myself and out of love for others and out of hoping for the best outcome for both myself and for other people, maximizing, optimizing that time that you talked about, and creating space for me to be the best person I can be, right? The best woman or person conditioned womanhood that I can be. So, do you want to talk a little bit about our challenge? It was so much fun.
It was a great time. So the challenge this week was unique in that it was an activity that we were able to do together in the moment that we called Smash Our Shame. So everybody, all of the participants in our group got a plate, a large plate that they were able to write things that they felt a sense of shame about. And then together as a group, each of us took an opportunity to smash that plate and
Quite literally.
symbolically, hmm? Yeah,
Quite
quite
literally.
literally, yes.
Yes.
Smashing our shame into a bunch of pieces. And to really like hold on to that moment and use that moment in the future when we feel a sense of shame.
Yeah. And there was an absolute release in the room. I feel like everybody, one, no one realized how strong they really were. There were some people that were a little bit hesitant about, taking up that space and creating a
Mm.
mess and creating a big impact. And then there were other people who were ready to release some of that pressure and some of that, that internal stress that we're providing of ourselves by storing all of this shame inside. And it was just a very, what's that word? Cathartic exercise. Yes, yes, yes. So I love this series. The Women's Empowerment Bootcamp was something that Dr. Alonso came to me and told me that it was her dream to put on a project like this. And it has been an honor to serve with you, Dr. Alonso, in creating space for our students to be empowered. And I really look forward to more opportunities for us to engage with not just each other, but with our students as well. I think we make a pretty good team. Um, Before we conclude, though, I do want to know one thing that you are going to take away from our boot camp and that you hope our listeners are taking away as well.
Yeah, and I think I can echo a lot of what you said, Carrie, and getting a chance to work with you and work with the students in who attended the group and really getting to realize this passion project of mine. One thing that I'm really taking away is the power that we have when we come together and being able to share these experiences, being able to support each other and learn from each other's experiences, is just such a powerful thing that cannot be replaced in any other kind of setting. And that's one thing that I would encourage our listeners to think about moving forward is how they can create these shared spaces and these relationships in their lives to continue to facilitate like how they can love themselves and support themselves and support and love the people around them.
Absolutely. I feel the same. I think the thing I learned the most from the camp is that we really are all in this together. I mean, I think American culture often kind of pits one against the other in terms of making it to the top, right? And being on that hustle culture and in that grind phase. And I think Gen Z, I've mentioned it so many times, but they're a generation that's constantly looking for ways to be authentic and looking for ways to show up as their full selves. And what a better way to show up as your full self by letting others in and being vulnerable and being able to learn from a group of people who have similar and different lived experiences as you, right? And being able to look at them and say, I see you. I hear you. I support you. I stand by you in your journey, right? That's so important. And I think it's something that has empowered me even more so as a an emerging adult. I guess I'm not really an emerging adult anymore, but I'm just over the hump, right? But as a woman working with other people who identify as women, I am definitely seeing the opportunities to engage more with my students in ways that empower them, right? And not just ways that just say I'm here for you, but also ways that give people action steps. So I'm hoping that our listeners are listening for the action steps that we give you and really taking into consideration the touch points we've talked about, the exercises we've worked on. Those things will also be posted on the website along with our podcast series so that you can kind of follow along and build this empowerment journey for yourself as well. Well, I'm almost hesitant to say it, but thank you all for listening to our podcast series, our Women's Empowerment Bootcamp. Stay tuned next year. Stay in touch with us, the UND Student Counseling Center and the Office of Inclusive Excellence and Retention Strategy, as we work towards creating more spaces for you to belong, to be seen and to be heard. Students, we're out here to support you. If you have questions or want to know how you can get more involved with either of our offices, please let us know. Dr. Alonso and I will be here to support you.